Is this the end of Arkham Horror, the card game? Let's talk about it. Before we get started, I want to give a big thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate the support. And if you like my content and you want to support the channel, you can do so by going to Patreon. And just for $1 a month, you get early access to all of my videos, and they're going to be ad-free during the early access period. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I am your innkeeper, and today we're going to be talking about Arkham Horror, the card game. There was a small conversation at the Great Old Ones Gaming Discord channel. If you're not a member, there's a link in the video description where you can join our Discord and have conversations with part of the community and get some insights into the game. Anyways, the Discord today had a few people talking about whether the current model can stay the same and keep the game alive, or whether the current model needs to change in order to keep the game going, especially for new players. It made me think about a few things, and when I sat down and reflected on some of the comments, I think a new edition is likely within the next 2 years if the current FFG Games living card game business model remains the same, at least for Arkham Horror, the card game. So I'm going to give you a few reasons why I think that is, and I'm going to give you a few things that I think that FFG can do to extend the life of the current edition of Arkham Horror, the card game. So I want to start this video by kind of going over some of the problems that are involved with this current business model. So as more product comes out monthly, the game is becoming harder and harder for new players to get into. Between the increasing cost of having all of the products, especially for completionists, and a lot of people that play card games are completionists. They're going to want to have everything so that they can make the best decks available with the current card pool as it stands. But in addition, it's not just the cost, but maintaining current product levels. It's becoming more and more difficult for game stores and even online retailers to maintain stock of certain expansions and deluxe boxes, as well as mythos packs, that kind of stuff. As more product is released, it's just going to become increasingly more difficult to continue to keep all of it in print. And then there's the issue of power creep. I think power creep is becoming very apparent in this game, and it creates a dilemma for designers. Do they make harder content to compensate for the power creep, or do they keep similar difficulty levels and make the game a cakewalk for experienced players who are already kind of figured out the current card pool? The first option makes it even harder for new players to get into the game, because if the game, it's already hard enough, if they make it even harder, a new player is going to get completely turned off by a game that's way too difficult. The second option, you're going to bore experienced players. So you're kind of stuck between the two here. Not to mention the increasing complexity of deck building and the game mechanics that they have to keep coming up with to keep people interested. So the developers are just trying to keep everything fresh and interesting, and then there's an overwhelmingly large card pool that is growing every single month that just makes things even more difficult to plan for, to see if anything's going to be broken or anything like that. Another factor for players, both experienced and new, is storage. You see posts everywhere, especially on Reddit, about storage solutions, and as the card pool grows, it just becomes even more of a problem. Where do you store your cards? What kind of storage solution do you have? The way the card pool is now, if you have an entire collection, you're going to have several different storage solutions for all your stuff. And I mean, even if you can find a good storage solution, the other problem is the space that you have in your home to dedicate to this game. It's just going to be a growing problem, right? Some players that I've seen have an entire bookshelf dedicated just for Arkham, and soon that bookshelf is not going to be enough by itself. I know I do. I have an entire bookshelf just for Arkham, and in fact, that's already full. So I've kind of migrated some extra cards over to an additional shelf because I own multiple copies of multiple expansions, and it just makes the card pool just massive. And the storage solutions that I currently have are plenty, but the space required for those storage solutions is another issue that needs to be taken into consideration. In my opinion, I think overall the biggest way to fix any of these issues is to just change the business model completely. So maybe what can be done is to separate the adventure packs from player cards and encounter cards and just keep them separate. The investigator starter packs are kind of a great starting point for doing this. From a business perspective, yeah, this is going to affect short-term profits. Standalone scenarios sell less than the campaign products, and I suspect it's because of the lack of player cards. Players want more options and cards, and selling campaigns without the player cards will affect their sales. Not just that, but if you have a group of friends that gets together and plays this game regularly, if you sell the campaign on its own, only one player really needs to buy it and the rest can play it. So unlike before where all those players needed to buy the campaign themselves if they want to take advantage of the player cards that are presented in each expansion. Players want more options and more cards, and selling campaigns without player cards can affect the sales for these packs. So I think maybe a good idea would be to package the old campaigns into one box as a large campaign pack, and then sell those older investigators as investigator decks with player cards from their corresponding campaign mixed in with some new ones, and that will spike interest for existing players. Condensing older campaigns into one product would not only lower shipping costs and inventory costs, but they also won't have to print as many because some players don't have as much interest in the older campaigns, but they do want to keep up with the experienced players in terms of deck building and that kind of thing. It's not a perfect solution, but it is a suggestion. In the Discord discussion, Nate from the Great Old Ones Gaming had a couple of things that he bullet pointed here. He says that if he was in charge of handling this stuff, what he would do is separate the player cards from the encounter cards. That's one of the ideas that I was thinking about too. This allows people to pick and choose how they flesh out their collections. He said he would release the campaigns in a return style box with all the scenarios for about $80 to $100, and it kills many birds with one stone. I totally agree with that. It makes the cost of getting a full campaign cheaper and also easier to find. You find the one box, you get the whole campaign. You don't have to go searching for individual Mythos packs, and like you see on Reddit, every single day there are posts, oh, I've got this whole campaign minus this one Mythos pack that has been very elusive for me in my country. I can't find this one Mythos pack. If you package it all into one box, you don't have that problem. You can buy the one campaign and be sure that you have every single scenario for it. He also said that he would release the investigator cards as investigator starter decks, which is, again, something that I had been thinking about as well, because it's now that they've released the investigator starter decks, it's pretty obvious that this is the way to go. The investigator starter decks were very popular. Clearly, they could sell a ton of them. And if they keep releasing investigators in that new business model type, then people will have the player cards that they need to make an efficient deck, and then they can go ahead and buy the scenario pack separately and play that with the decks that they wanted. And if there's a certain class or faction that they don't like to play, they don't have to buy the cards for that faction. So it's a win-win for everybody, not to mention the fact that FFG can continue selling scenarios and investigator decks and still make money in that way. Another great solution that I was thinking about is to digitize part of the game, make the scenarios digital, kind of like Mansions of Madness 2nd edition has done, sell the campaigns and Mythos packs digitally, lowering the printing, shipping, and storage costs, completely removing the shortage issue and distribution issues, or maybe create a subscription model where you pay a low monthly fee and then you have access to all the previous scenarios and campaigns and any new ones that are released, and you just pay a subscription, which is clearly what FFG has been wanting by releasing these Mythos packs on a monthly basis, is a type of subscription service where they're making revenue every month. Well, this is certainly an interesting way to do that. You could release the player cards for people who want to make decks and play along with their phone, their computer, their tablet, still manage resources and tokens physically, and damage and things like that. Horror, make them all tokens, physical tokens, make the player cards physical, make the scenarios digital. So you're playing with your physical cards for your deck, then counter digitally. This change will not only reduce the table space that's required to play, it would enable better capabilities to play with your friends remotely. Certain triggers for locations could be automated, so you're not bogged down with having to remember this trigger and this trigger and this trigger. Not only that, but your friend can play with their deck, you can play with your deck, and the scenario is all digital, so there's not a whole lot to manage there. And then on top of that, setup and takedown times would be greatly reduced because it would all be done for you digitally instantly. And the longest part of setup is setting up the scenario. If you've pre-built your deck, you do that before you start your game. The scenario itself, setting up that you have to do, right? So it would greatly reduce setup and takedown times, which is a pain point for a lot of Arkham Horror players. And then you'd be spending more time playing the actual game. So I really think this is something that they should consider for the next edition of Arkham Horror, the card game, or even for this edition if they want to change things around a little bit. And then on top of that, we have the world crisis that's going on right now, right? Everybody's remote. Some people can't connect and meet in person. Playgroups have been kind of separated from each other. This is a great way for them to connect and play remotely. I really like this solution. I think it can fix a lot of problems that plague Arkham. But I do understand that a lot of people want the physical components for the entire game without having to touch anything digital. So I do understand that it's not for everybody. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is one that I think should be taken into consideration. So regardless of what Arkham or FFG decides to do with the game, because of the business model of a living card game, the lifespan of Arkham Horror LCG is not infinity. A new edition is an option. So I think that, developers do risk upsetting players who have invested hundreds, if not thousands of dollars into the game. If they go ahead and just say, oh, we're done with this one, let's go ahead and release a new edition. They could potentially lose a lot of people. So I think they do resist the urge to go into a new edition. A new edition is an option, but the upsetting of players is a real thing that they need to consider. And even though the game's popularity is the highest that it's ever been, I do think that within the next 2 years, something does need to change in order to keep that popularity going. The living card game model is a raging monster in a cage that's just like growing and growing and growing, and eventually it's going to want to burst out. So I think that some change does need to happen. So is the end of Arkham close? I don't know that it's close, but we can see it. So it's in the future, but it's something that we can see up ahead, and it's coming, and we're getting closer to it. So change of some sorts is necessary in order to either push that end further up or completely remove it from our current vision. So I do think that a change is absolutely necessary in order to keep the game as popular as it's been. And what do you guys think? Is Arkham's current model sustainable? Will a new edition be a good solution? Will a digital solution be a good solution? Or maybe just changing the distribution? Older packs that are now several years old, should they just condense them into one major, larger pack so it's easier for people to access? Let's go ahead and talk about it. Put it in the comments. Join the Great Old Ones Discord and we'll talk about it there. Or, you know what, shoot me an email. innkeeper@twistedtentacleinn.com, and I'll be happy to talk about it with you. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, and if you have any other questions or comments, be sure to leave them down there in the comments down below. As always, I'm your innkeeper from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then.